Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something tonight. Have you ever wondered what truly moves the world? Is it science with its dazzling discoveries? Is it power, wealth, or technology? No. The greatest force of all is something you cannot see, something no scientist can put under a microscope, something no machine can ever measure. It is the invisible force that has carried broken men to victory, that has lifted nations out of despair, that has turned ordinary people into legends. It is the power of trust. Trust, the silent fire that burns in the heart when logic says, give up. Trust, the bridge between impossible dreams and unstoppable reality. Trust, the one force that has moved mountains long before science even knew how to measure their weight. And tonight, we will explore this force, this mystery, this power that shocks even scientists, but remains unspoken in their equations. Stay with me until the very end, because what you are about to hear may just change the way you see your life forever. Trust is not just an emotional idea or soft, invisible bond between people. It is a force so strong that it often functions like a superpower that transcends the measurable world of science. When scientists investigate human behavior, they rely on data, statistics, neurological scans, and psychological models. But what they cannot fully capture is the pure, unshakable energy that comes when a person decides to trust. Unlike gravity, electricity, or chemical reactions that can be quantified and proven through formulas, trust is not something that can be placed in a laboratory flask or measured by instruments. Yet its impact is undeniable and often far greater than any natural law. A person who trusts deeply can take risks that no formula can justify, endure hardships that no equation can predict, and achieve results that no experiment can guarantee. It operates like an invisible current flowing through human life, altering outcomes in ways that defy calculation. When we say trust is a superpower, it is because of the transformation it brings to the human mind and spirit. Think about moments when people are faced with impossible odds. A climber standing before the tallest mountain, a soldier entering a battlefield, a leader rallying a broken nation, or even an ordinary individual fighting against overwhelming personal struggles. All of these situations have one common denominator: trust. Trust in one's ability, trust in the process, trust in a dream, or trust in a higher power. Give strength where none existed. Science may measure the physical capacity of muscles, the oxygen levels in blood, or the fatigue threshold of the human body, but it cannot explain why a person sometimes goes far beyond all of those limits simply because he believes he can. This is why trust becomes a kind of superhuman energy, because it allows human beings to step into arenas where logic says they should collapse, but faith says they will rise. Trust also reshapes the brain in ways that science still struggles to understand. Neuroscientists can map patterns of the brain under fear or stress, but they do not have the full answer to what happens when a person surrenders to trust. Imagine someone in despair, feeling lost and broken, suddenly finding hope because he decides to believe in something bigger than his pain. In that moment, his body finds strength, his mind discovers clarity, and his actions begin to shift. Science may describe chemical changes such as dopamine release or hormonal balance, but it cannot explain why some individuals survive impossible conditions, wars, disasters, diseases, only because they trusted they would make it through. The spark of trust does more than change biology. It unlocks a hidden dimension of human potential that no machine can predict. Another reason trust is a superpower beyond science is its ability to multiply collective energy. One person trusting another creates a bond, and when entire groups trust together, movements are born, revolutions, social changes, And victories in history were never the result of pure scientific equations. They were born because ordinary men and women trusted a vision. The civil rights movement, independence struggles, great humanitarian missions, all these grew from trust. People trusted their leaders, trusted their cause, trusted one another, and that trust created unstoppable momentum. Science can describe how crowds behave, but it cannot fully explain how courage spreads like wildfire when people trust in a shared belief. Trust becomes contagious, and once it spreads, it transforms powerless individuals into powerful communities that can alter the course of history. Trust also works on an individual's relationship with fear. Fear is one of the most powerful emotions studied in psychology, known to paralyze decision-making and reduce a person's capacity to act. Yet, when trust enters, fear loses its control. A child trusting a parent feels safe even in darkness. An entrepreneur trusting his vision dares to step into uncertainty. A patient trusting his treatment finds the will to heal. Science may chart how fear activates the amygdala, but it cannot quantify how trust silences that fear. It cannot measure the moment when a trembling heart suddenly becomes steady simply because it decides to believe. This is why trust feels supernatural. It replaces the natural reaction of panic with the extraordinary choice of courage. Furthermore, trust has an enduring quality that defies time. Science often works in measurable moments, seconds, hours, or years, but trust is timeless. A word of trust given decades ago can still sustain a person in the present. A promise from a parent, a vow between friends, or faith in a divine presence carries strength across years, even when logic suggests it should fade. People live their entire lives on the foundation of trust they received in their childhood or at a turning point in their journey. No experiment in physics or biology has yet explained how something intangible can carry such lasting weight. Trust is remembered by the heart long after it is spoken, and it empowers action long after circumstances have changed. Trust also carries a paradox that science cannot unravel. The weaker a person feels, the stronger trust becomes. In the scientific world, strength comes from resources, training, or power. But in the realm of trust, strength emerges exactly when resources run out, when logic fails, and when power disappears. History is full of examples of people who had nothing left but trust, and in that emptiness they discovered a force greater than armies, money, or machines. A single mother raising children in poverty, a freedom fighter facing an empire, or a patient fighting against a terminal diagnosis. All of them often described that it was trust, not evidence, that kept them alive and moving forward. Trust thrives in weakness, and in that way it surpasses scientific law, because it transforms scarcity into abundance and despair into hope. Science often avoids discussing trust in its purest form because it does not fit into laboratories. It is not repeatable, not always predictable, and not easily proven. Yet life itself proves it every day. When a pilot takes off, he trusts his instruments and training. When a surgeon operates, the patient trusts her hands. When a child takes the first step, he trusts the arms waiting to catch him. Every act of courage, every leap of progress, every step toward the unknown is built not on formulas, but on trust. Without it, science itself would not advance, because every experiment begins with the trust that discovery is possible. The irony is that while scientists may rarely mention trust as a measurable force, their work is impossible without it. In essence, trust is like the wind, invisible to the eye, but powerful enough to move oceans, lift planes, and shape entire landscapes. Science can study the effects of the wind, but cannot stop its invisible nature. In the same way, trust is unseen, yet undeniable, immeasurable, yet transformative, unscientific, yet deeply real. It is the invisible superpower that carries human beings beyond the limits of knowledge, beyond the boundaries of logic, into a realm where mountains are not obstacles, but stepping stones. Trust unlocks the impossible because it is the foundation on which every great dream and every bold step forward rests. History is filled with examples of human beings who had no reason to believe in success, no visible proof that their journey would succeed, and yet they moved ahead because of trust. A dream without trust remains an idea, a vision that never leaves the mind. But when trust enters, that dream becomes a living force, driving people to action, compelling them to persist, and giving them the courage to endure obstacles that would have otherwise destroyed them. Scientists can measure effort, resources, and probabilities, but they cannot quantify why some individuals achieve what should be impossible. Trust is that hidden catalyst, invisible to the eye but powerful enough to transform frailty into resilience and uncertainty into determination. When we study revolutions and breakthroughs, we realize that they were rarely built on certainty. The great leaders of history did not begin with guarantees. They began with trust. Nations fighting for independence did not know if they could defeat empires, but they trusted the vision of freedom. Inventors did not know if their experiments would work, but they trusted their pursuit of discovery. Even spiritual leaders who brought hope to millions did not have assurance of acceptance, yet they trusted their calling. It was this trust that turned doubts into milestones. Without trust, revolutions would have collapsed under the weight of fear. Inventions would have died on the pages of unfinished notebooks, and spiritual messages would have been silenced before they could reach hearts. What science calls improbable, trust calls inevitable, because trust gives the human spirit the strength to keep moving when reason says stop. Trust in oneself is perhaps the most powerful form of unlocking the impossible. A person who trusts himself is willing to fail repeatedly, to endure criticism, to rise again when others laugh or mock. Self-trust is what drove explorers into unknown seas, pilots into uncharted skies, and pioneers into dangerous lands. Without maps, without technology, and without certainty, they only had trust in their abilities and instinct. This kind of trust does not deny fear. It transforms it into fuel. Fear says you will fall, but trust says even if you fall, you will rise stronger. Fear says the odds are against you, but trust says the odds are irrelevant when determination is unshakable. Trust creates a mental shift where impossibility becomes nothing more than a challenge waiting to be conquered. But trust in others also plays a critical role in making the impossible possible. Great achievements are rarely solo journeys. They require communities, partnerships, and shared sacrifices. Soldiers in a war trust one another with their lives. Scientists working on breakthroughs trust each other's data. And teams in business trust each other's skills. Without that trust, collaboration collapses, and with it, the dream. Trust builds a bridge between people where doubt would otherwise build walls. It allows individuals to lean on one another, to share burdens, and to multiply their strengths. History's great movements, whether social, political, or scientific, were driven not just by leaders, but by the trust that connected followers to one another. Trust unified them, and that unity unlocked outcomes far beyond what any individual could achieve alone. There is also the trust in a higher power, which has fueled some of the most astonishing stories of endurance and triumph. People have endured imprisonment, persecution, poverty, and even torture, not because they had evidence of survival, but because they trusted in a greater plan. That trust gave them unexplainable peace, an inner fire that burned brighter than the darkness around them. Scientists may say that hope improves resilience, but hope itself is born from trust. The trust that tomorrow can be better, that suffering has meaning, and that even in weakness, there is unseen strength. This spiritual trust has lifted entire generations, carried civilizations through hardships, and sustained individuals when every rational calculation pointed toward failure. It has given courage where none should exist, and power where none could be explained. Trust not only propels individuals forward, but also reshapes the very definition of possible. There was a time when flying across oceans, communicating instantly across continents, or sending humans into space seemed absurd. These achievements did not begin with formulas. They began with trust. Trust in visionaries who dared to imagine. Trust in teams who worked tirelessly. Trust in processes that had never been tested before. Every invention we take for granted today was once impossible until trust turned it into reality. It is trust that allows dreamers to invest years of labor into ideas that seem foolish to the present but essential to the future. Science can describe the outcome once it is achieved, but trust is what starts the journey when success is nothing but a fragile hope. The resilience born from trust is also unmatched. People who trust a goal do not surrender when obstacles appear. Instead, they find ways to go around them, through them, or over them. They treat failures not as final, but as stepping stones. This resilience is not logical in the eyes of science, because repeated failure should logically lead to abandonment. Yet history is filled with inventors who failed hundreds of times but trusted their eventual success. Leaders who faced defeat after defeat but trusted that victory would come. And dreamers who saw doors close repeatedly but trusted that another door would open. It is this persistence, powered by trust, that turns what once seemed impossible into a new reality. Trust also awakens creativity in moments of desperation. When people trust that a solution exists, they search harder, innovate faster, and think beyond limitations. Desperation without trust leads to despair, but desperation with trust leads to breakthroughs. Entire industries have been saved, new technologies invented, and humanitarian efforts expanded because people trusted that even in their darkest hour, an answer could be found. This refusal to surrender is not born of scientific reasoning, but of trust that refuses to bow to impossibility. Trust compels the mind to find solutions because it anchors itself in the belief that solutions are there, waiting to be uncovered. When trust fuels action, impossibility becomes a word of the past. The stories of human achievement are not just tales of intelligence or resources. They are stories of trust. Trust allowed people to march when they were told to kneel, to build when they were told it could not be done, to dream when they were told it was foolish, and to persist when they were told to give up. Trust is the invisible flame behind every transformation that science later comes to explain. But in the beginning, before any data or proof, it was trust that carried people forward. It is trust that takes the first step into the unknown, trust that keeps walking through uncertainty, and trust that unlocks the door where impossibility once stood guard. Science may shock the world with its discoveries, it may open doors to hidden dimensions of the universe, and it may explain the mechanics of how life operates, yet there remains one profound truth that it cannot capture: the miracle of how trust lifts a human being out of despair and gives him the will to rise again. Trust achieves what science cannot explain, because trust belongs to a realm that does not operate on the laws of numbers, logic, or equation. A person lying in ruins, broken by tragedy, is not supposed to stand again. A mind shattered by failure is not expected to fight once more. A heart crushed by betrayal is not supposed to love again. Yet history is full of countless men and women who did exactly that. Not because science had an answer for them, but because they held on to trust. Trust in themselves, trust in another, trust in the possibility of tomorrow, or trust in a divine presence gave them a power no microscope, no formula, no test tube could ever describe. Science explains survival by biology, by the strength of the immune system, by the adaptability of the human brain. But trust often goes beyond what biology should allow. A soldier with a mortal wound survives long enough to save his companion because he trusts he cannot die before finishing his duty. A patient with no chance of recovery defies medical predictions because he trusts he will heal. A mother in famine keeps her children alive, not because of food that exists, but because she trusts she will find some way to provide. Doctors, researchers, and analysts may stand amazed, unable to explain why, But trust achieves what science cannot quantify. It is not chemical, it is spiritual, it is not mechanical, it is transcendent. It is not a force that fits into a machine, but one that beats within the heart, unseen yet undeniable. There is a reason scientists rarely speak of trust in their equations. It does not conform to the repeatable nature of experiments. Yet the world itself is proof that trust is at work every single day. A farmer plants seeds without knowing if rain will come, but he trusts the season. A pilot flies through turbulence with trust in the unseen skies. A sailor enters an ocean that could swallow him whole, but he trusts the horizon will guide him. Without trust, progress halts. Without trust, no invention is tested, no journey is begun, no dream is pursued. Trust is the engine behind all advancement, and though science may measure the result of progress, it cannot measure the invisible courage that makes progress possible in the first place. Trust also explains the resilience of people in suffering in ways science cannot. Psychological studies can show patterns of trauma, they can predict breakdowns, but they cannot predict why some individuals against all odds rise stronger. Two people may experience the same tragedy. One collapses permanently, while the other rises, builds, and inspires the world. What is the difference? It is not intellect, not wealth, not status. It is trust. Trust that life is not over. Trust that meaning still exists. Trust that tomorrow holds light, even when today is dark. This trust is not measurable, but it is the deciding factor between despair and destiny. Without it, humanity would have surrendered long ago. With it, humanity continues to rebuild after every disaster, to stand after every fall, to sing after every silence. Trust even plays a role in creativity and imagination that science cannot explain. A scientist can analyze the brain waves of an artist or the neural firing of an inventor, but he cannot measure the inner conviction that makes the artist believe his vision will matter, or the inventor trust that his idea is worth the pain of failure. Trust drives creativity into realms that numbers cannot reach. The greatest works of art, literature, invention, and philosophy were born from trust, that they would resonate, that they would matter, that they would change something in the world. Trust in the unseen is what paints masterpieces before the first brush touches the canvas, what writes stories before the first word is placed on paper, what invents technologies before the first machine is built. Science may later study the process, but the spark that begins it comes from trust alone. One of the most astonishing ways trust achieves what science cannot is in the realm of forgiveness and reconciliation. Logic says a person betrayed should never trust again. A community broken by conflict should never heal, but trust proves otherwise. People who should be enemies extend their hands in peace. Families shattered by hatred find unity, and individuals scarred by betrayal open their hearts again. These are not scientific equations. They are human miracles. Trust has the ability to mend wounds invisible to medicine, to rebuild bridges that history declared broken forever, and to restore life to hearts that science would call beyond repair. No laboratory can create the chemistry of reconciliation because it is not born of matter, but of trust. Trust also reveals itself in the endurance of hope across generations. Entire cultures have survived oppression, slavery, and exile, not because they had resources, but because they carried trust in their hearts. They trusted that one day freedom would come, that one day they would return home, that one day justice would prevail. This trust passed from parents to children like an inheritance more powerful than wealth. It sustained people across centuries, keeping their spirit alive when everything else was stripped away. Science can describe generational memory, but it cannot explain why oppressed people sing songs of hope in their darkest hour. Trust alone gives that song its voice. And trust alone gives that song the power to outlive centuries. Even in the modern world of technology, trust is still the invisible currency of survival. Banks operate because of trust. Governments function because of trust. Families remain whole because of trust. Remove trust, and collapse follows instantly. Yet science cannot define trust as it defines currency, laws, or systems. It cannot predict the exact moment when trust breaks, nor can it predict the exact moment when trust is restored. This is because trust is not bound to formulas. It is bound to the invisible fiber of human choice. People decide to trust, and that decision creates worlds that did not exist before. It is the decision to trust that begins revolutions, that sparks relationships, that fuels missions. Trust has always been the invisible architect behind the visible structures of society. Ultimately, trust achieves what science cannot because it belongs to the core of human existence, not the mechanics of human biology. It is what makes the human spirit unbreakable, what allows humanity to dream beyond evidence, to hope beyond despair, to rise beyond ruin. Every story of impossible survival, every tale of unexpected triumph, every account of miracles that defy explanation points back to trust as the secret force at work. Where science ends, trust begins. Where logic halts, trust carries forward. Where equations fail, trust writes its own answer. It is the reason broken hearts beat again, shattered lives rebuild, and hopeless situations turn into victories. It is the invisible force lifting humanity to places no scientific calculation has ever been able to predict. So, my friends, when the world tells you that mountains cannot be moved, remember this: science may measure the weight of the mountain, it may calculate its height, it may even predict how long it will stand, but trust is the invisible force that makes the impossible possible. Trust is what gives you the courage to climb, the strength to endure, and the vision to see beyond the summit. Trust is greater than fear, stronger than doubt, and deeper than despair. It is the fire that keeps humanity alive, the bridge that carries us through storms, and the heartbeat of every victory ever written in history. So trust yourself, trust those who walk beside you, and above all, trust the higher power that watches over you, because with trust, no wall is too high, no night is too dark, and no dream is too far. Trust is not just an idea. It is the power that moves mountains. To everyone listening, may this message of trust stay alive in your heart. May it guide your choices, strengthen your spirit, and remind you that you are capable of more than the world can measure. Good luck on your journey. May trust carry you to places beyond your imagination. And thank you for allowing me to share this moment with you.